10 seconds, 5 seconds, start. I have a feeling that another stage in our journey has been reached and a duty done, well done, if I may say so. At the same time, I feel even more strongly that a still more difficult duty is ahead of us. Another journey has immediately to be undertaken in which there are no resting places. As far as the present plan is concerned, it may be said to have had its beginning long before the Planning Commission came into existence. Much thought and many discussions had been devoted to the question of planning in India before the Planning Commission was actually created. I suppose I can speak about the Planning Commission without being unduly modest because my connection with it has been intimate. Nevertheless, the burden of work fell lightly upon me. Others carried the burden, and if I prize the work of the Commission, I do not prize myself. As I said, I can speak a little more freely about it than if I had been one of the recipients of my own prize. The Planning Commission has worked very hard, very consciously, very earnestly, and with a true crusading spirit in preparing this plan. I should like, therefore, to pay tributes to them, and it is not empty tribute paid blindly, but a tribute paid with due knowledge of what they have done. And that, if I may say so, need not necessarily mean that we agree or disagree with any particular chapter or particular part of the report. The work of the Commission is, in a sense, the first of its kind, certainly the first of its kind in India. I think we might justifiably add that in its particular context, it is the first thing of its kind anywhere. Planning became well known when the first 5-year plan of Soviet Union came into the field 20 years ago and has been something rather fashionably and much talked about ever since. It is easy to talk about planning in limited spares of activity. Naturally, planning for a whole nation involves infinitely great effort than planning in bits. Planning in the large sense is thus an integrated way of looking at a nation's manifold activities. I do not mean to go in for comparisons, but the old Soviet approach to planning was different from ours, both from the point of view of objectives and that of the methods adopted, though the difference between the two countries was greater in the later case. In view of the fact that we function under a democratic regime which we have deliberately adopted and enshrined in our constitution and in this parliament, any planning that we do must naturally be within that setup. The Commission does not have the right to draw up a program that has no relation to our Constitution or to the setup under which we work. Now that puts certain self-imposed limitations on a plan, but I would like to say that those limitations are not final. I do not think it would be right to say that democratic functioning necessarily means limitations. It may make the way a little more difficult. The procedure adopted may have to be a little more complicated, but it should be possible for a democratic setup if it is properly worked to make provision for everything we want done. I suppose that is the only real justification for a democratic setup apart from other justification in a democracy. Things are built in a firm foundation even though it may take a longer time and built with due consideration for the individual. However, that is not a point I wish to labor. What I want to say is that since we have accepted a democratic setup and the way in which our parliament functions, we must consider the plan on a similar basis. We have framed a constitution and we should abide by the constitution. Nevertheless, let it not be said that every part, every chapter, and every word of that constitution is so sacrosanct that it cannot be changed even if the needs of the country or the nation so demand. If it is thought that some part of the constitution comes in the way of the nation's progress, it can undoubtedly be changed, not lightly but after full deliberation. But generally speaking, we have to plan in accordance with the constitution. Now, this plan, or rather its parent, the draft outline, was placed before the country and before this parliament a little over a year ago. At the time, it received general approval from parliament and has since then been the subject of both approval and criticism in some parts of the country of condemnation. Anyhow, the reaction of the plan all over the country has been very generally favorable. The planning commission has had benefit of the criticism that was placed before them, and I must say has profited even by the condemnation of certain parts of the plan.